Imri's fiery eyes turned cold, and the dragon's voice became deep and terrible to hear. The words spoken were lost to the boy as they were not translated into the common tongue. Though the tone told Drake whatever was being uttered was unpleasant, the verses were melodic and flowed in a way that the human voice could not replicate. When the slow and yielding words finally ran their course, Imri spoke to Drake once more. Now, listen and listen well. I have not the power to grant you the ability to strike me down. Even if I could, the strength required would eclipse that which your vessel can yet wield, and you would be destroyed. To fulfill my vow to you and to have my wish granted, I must reveal my name. Suddenly the slight pulsation of the scarlet veins became more volatile, and Imri's voice grew quiet and grave. When I reveal to you my true name, command me to bow my head, and then take the blade and cut my horns off at the roots. Then again, issue a decree to me to chew the horns till my teeth are shattered. Your might is meager, and thus your hold over me will be short-lived. However, with each vestige of my glory removed, your power over me will be increased. When my might is broken, command me to bless the name of my slayer. My power will be broken, and you will have the capacity to destroy me. Take the blade, extinguish the fire from my eyes, and end this torment. Upon my death, what I have vowed to you will be yours. Drake's limbs felt as if they had been turned to lead, and his heart ached within him. Confusion and fear enwrapped his senses. Visions of what Imri had depicted flashed within his mind's eye, and he quickly realized he no longer wanted any part of this cruel ploy. This creature was mad. With his mind reeling, vainly he searched for an alternative. However, the boy's machinations were interrupted by the even stillness of Imri's firm voice. You may leave at any time before I share my true name. You shall not be forced or compelled to stay beyond your present circumstance. As for my methods, I was not designed with the intent to be destroyed. To overcome me, you must be truly mighty. My horns and my teeth are my strength, what little remains. Once they are taken, you would still be woefully outmatched, but the blade will grant you the strength required to fell a creature such as I.
Now the dragon turned silent and awaited the boy's response. Drake knew he was not a particularly moral person, and that he had caused a substantial amount of grief to many, but he had never found delight in that knowledge. He had seen plenty of suffering in his short life, and he was slow to impart more upon the world. He was already conflicted by the thought of destroying one of sage years, but for Imris to meet his end in such a manner was absolutely abhorrent. The emptiness of the void compounded the burden of his decision. He and the dragon stood alone against the seemingly endless expanse of the chasm. Drake found his eyes fixated on the blade, his shimmering ripples catching the pulsing scarlet light. He had not returned to the boughs of the Barren Summit only to leave his task unfinished. As regrettable as Imri's request may be, it was the creature's heart's desire to be free of this place, and he had agreed to be the dragon's executioner. Clearing his dry throat, the boy met the serpent's gaze and issued his reply. Let it be so. Imri bowed his head ever so slightly at the young thief's words before his voice softly echoed. The time is now. Sianwen rise. The one you see before you is the dragon, Ningal Suin. I pray you have mercy upon me. As soon as Sianwen Rise heard the name, a thrill shot through his spine as though an ancient and precious gem had been placed before him. All at once, the boy was overwhelmed by the weight of the gift and the opportunity it had to offer, yet without any means to know how to wield its unfathomable potential. However, the dragon's words were instantly brought to his recollection, and he resolved to maintain his vow, despite the pull of a temptation he did not understand. Clearing his throat, he dryly whispered, "Bow your head." With these words, Ningalsuin's neck bowed stiffly, as though a great burden had been placed on him, till the dragon's massive jaw rested before the blade on the dismal stone. Despite the foreknowledge, Rise's heart skipped a beat as the terrifying creature knelt before him. Stunned, the boy stood, for the first time staring into the serpent's gaze at eye level. Sheepishly, the boy tore his focus from off the titanic creature's unnerving glare and stooped down to collect the blade. Jets of steaming air stung Rise's hands as he collected it from off the hot stone before Ningalsuin. Full of fear, the boy looked upon the dragon, knowing that he must straddle the serpent's muzzle if he was to reach its tarnished crown. Awkwardly, he attempted to find a foothold that would leave either of them with a shred of dignity. The heat radiating from the creature intensified Rise's embarrassment as he fumbled his way up the dragon's face. The dragon's scales were scalding hot, and had it not been for the boy's shame at his blundering, he would have recoiled from pain as he touched the serpent's snout. He could not bear to meet Ningal's gaze, out of fear and shame, even as he crawled over its vast brow. Finally, he perched himself between the two horns, which were even hotter than the dragon's flesh. Sweat was already soaking through the boy's winter garments as Rise readied the blade, though he had no idea how he would even begin to scratch the horn. Gripping the hilt with both hands, Samwin Rise slowly placed the blade to the dragon's right horn. The horn's width was so great it almost spanned the length of the blade. When the sword's serpentine edge touched the base of the rugged horn, there was a faint white flash, then sparks, before a startled Samwin Rise snatched the sword from the horn. Placing his hand at the base, he found a small groove where the blade had cut into the bone. A cold chill ran down the boy's spine as he realized his task was not hopeless. In that moment, he didn't know what was more nerve-wracking, the prospect of failing the dragon, or actually going through with the plan. Samwin Rise shakily placed the sword at the base of the horn, before drawing up all of his strength and steadying his heart. With a sudden lurching thrust, he drove the edge of the blade against the bone with all of his might. The piercing white light blazed, and a dreadful heat arose from the incision. Repulsed by the power, he fell into his thrust in order to continue working the edge deeper. In spite of the initial force leaving him dazed, he turned his head in an attempt to shield himself from the blinding white light. It stung his eyes, though they were tightly shut. The searing heat drew the sweat from his body like a sponge being wrung. There was no escape, and against the raging inferno, his scrawny frame strained to keep a handle on the callus. The blade worked its way gradually, but steadily through the horn. But each inch took its toll on the boy, and at any moment he felt he would faint. However, wave after wave of heat engulfed him, but in his quivering hand the sword lent him strength, and he focused on how cool and steady it remained in spite of the violent blaze. With renewed determination he pressed against the bony monument. It was so large that the boy was forced to blindly creep across the dragon's scorching brow in order to continue the grim work. At last the sword came free, and the boy nearly lost his balance as the resistance broke. There was a moment of complete stillness, as Rise's eyes blinked against the dimness of the cave, when the sudden crash of the massive horn clashing against the stone floor rang out through the darkness, echoing for far longer and far louder than Rise thought possible. Prying his eyes open, he looked down at his handiwork. The dark red horn lay angrily against the charred stone. It still brimmed with the scarlet glow from the innumerable fractures that lined it, but with each passing moment the veins grew dimmer and dimmer. Samwin Rise felt his nerves slip, and he knew if he gave himself pause, then his resolve would forsake him. Gingerly the boy scuttled across the dragon's brow and readied himself for the final blow. He pressed the blade's length against the horn and shielded himself from the fiery light. While this one did not take the same toll on the boy's body, his mind was thrust into a violent tumult. Each moment was an eternity. Like a fitful dream, the world of the chasm fractured and cracked, giving way to more familiar terrors. The visions that flooded his senses were fraught with pain, frantic terror. Among the confusion, images would suddenly appear and then disappear with a similar abruptness. Visions that preyed on his mind, dreadful things that had happened became intertwined with things that might have happened, which led him down paths of fabrications that within his addled mind were the only truth. All the while he could hear screams, though they were distant and were the least of his anxieties. When the horn clanged against the ground once more, Cian Rise was freed from his visions. The entirety of his being shook violently, and his form went limp as it slumped from off the dragon's snout onto the comparatively cool stony ground with a soft thud. Distantly he could hear the echoes of the screams from his waking terror, and realized that it had been his own cries. As he lay on the ground, his mind and body spent, Rise found himself wishing he had never fled Hydria, and that he had met his fate there at the gallows. He knew that if there had been any spare water left in his body, it would have been spent weeping now. Gently he could feel a surge that stemmed the pain and soothed his distressed spirit. Somehow he knew it was the dragon's doing, though Ningal remained silent, allowing the boy time to recover. As the pain subsided from his mind and body, Rise realized that he was still clutching the callus. Setting his mind on the sword further reinforced his spirit. Though he wished he could rest for longer, he knew his task was far from finished. Rise shakily rose to his feet and met Ningalsuin's gaze, the creature having risen to his full stature once more, appearing more serpent-like now without the horns, stared down at the haggard boy expectantly. There was a distinct weariness to the creature, and the boy knew that they had both suffered mightily. Still, the dragon stood proud and bold in spite of his broken crown. Cian Rise silently rehearsed the words of Ningal and remembered the dragon's next task. Following Ningal's example, Rise resolved to compose himself, and with all the dignity he could muster he hoarsely commanded, "Break your teeth on your own horns." With startling swiftness, Ningal snatched up both horns in one fell swoop. Arching his neck high against the failing light of the scarlet veins, the dragon's mighty jaws gnashed its teeth against the horns with sickening crunches. Yet, even now, Ningal showed no signs of pain. When at last the command was satisfied, the dragon spat the horns to the side with a raucous tumult. Staring into the twin flames of the dragon's vacuous gaze, Cian Rise's mouth ran dry and he could not form words. The glow from Ningal's eyes was now stark against the cavern's ceiling, as the scarlet veins dimmed. The eyes were expectant, but Cian Rise struggled mightily to form the words. When at last he voiced his last command just above a throaty whisper, "Bless the name of your destroyer." Within Rise's mind the voice of Ningalsuin resounded, proud and resolute, even as the mountain itself groaned and shook. "All the days of Cian Rise shall be blessed. Between him and my kin there shall be a bond of kinship. Our protection shall not depart from him till the last dragon's flame be quenched. 3 commands has he issued me, and 3 gifts will I grant to my slayer. The knowledge he seeks will find him. The resolve of the mind will be equaled by that of the body. And lastly, neither mind nor body shall fall prey to the ravages of time." The dragon's blessing lingered in the air for a long time. When at last there was silence, the dragon bowed his head low and peered down at the boy, before resting his head on the charred ground. Rise's hand shook, and his heart raced. The flames shone brightly and pierced the boy's very soul. His power over the dragon was broken, and now the wishes of Ningal weighed heavily upon him. Taking up the sword on trembling legs, the youth approached the blazing eye, still full of life and vigor. even if the rest of the body was weary and scarred. Staring into the singular eye, Rise could feel himself being drawn into its boundless depths. The tranquil pool that made up the eye was utterly bereft of light, save for the ring of fire that the boy took to be both the dragon's iris and the eternal spark yet to be quenched. He had never struggled to see the flame, but in that moment it seemed so unfathomably distant, like a star in the heavens. Enwrapped as he was, Rise realized he was not being drawn into its depths, but the flame was rising to meet him. With that realization, the distant flame abruptly came within an arm's length, or sword's thrust. Taking one long look into the mesmerizing flame, Xianwen Rise held the sword aloft and readied himself to plunge the blade deep into the void and extinguish the flame. For a brief moment, he hesitated, still shaken from his ordeal and conflicted about the course before him. With one swift motion, Rise plunged the blade deep into the inky depths, his aim true, striking the very center of the flame. No sooner had the flame been pierced than the eye went cold and an eternal darkness set within its depths. Quickly Rise withdrew the blade and stared, mortified at the foul result of his hand. The boy was only roused by the sudden realization that he had not taken a breath since he had raised the blade. Panting, Rise paused as he searched for any signs of emotion within Ningao's countenance. However, the dragon's visage remained statuesque and unfazed. Summoning his strength one last time, he prepared to quell the final flame. This time, with a sense of urgency as he felt the creature's hold on him slipping, and knew that he was fully committed to this course of action. Without a word, Xianwen Rise raised the callus on high, and slew Ningao Suen. The dragon's muscles relaxed, the light scarlet veins failed, and the air turned cold. A long time passed with Rise standing in the darkness unmoving. His weariness, hunger, and thirst had all returned to him. However, the boy realized the dragon's protection had not only been shielding him from his physical ailments, but his mental ones as well. The sorrows that had been distant suddenly emerged once more. Oddly, it was in this moment that Rise found strength to come to terms with his uncle's death and his own plight. He found that in spite of the heaviness in his heart, he had hope. Perhaps it was the knowledge that there was a path out, or some strand of madness had taken root in his mind. But, whichever it may be, he felt all was not lost. The boy resolved to tarry no longer in this foulest of tombs. But before he left, he thought to leave a monument to honor the great dragon. The boy's sole possession of any value was the very instrument of Ningao's imprisonment and destruction, which Rise believed would be a mocking memorial. After a moment of pondering, he decided to leave an inscription to honor Ningao Suen. His mother had once taught him some runes when he was quite young. He had been a poor student, but he was able to recall a few, though none were particularly fitting for funeral rites. Finally, Rise decided on the symbol for trust, and awkwardly, he scratched out an ill-formed version of the Ardenian rune into the chalky stone, using the blade. Turning from the desolation, Xianwen Rise began to make his way back to the open air. No longer guided by Ningao, Rise found he could easily recall his journey to the western wilds. His eyes, though hindered by the darkness, could make out shapes that marked his path. As he progressed through the chasm, he reviewed his conversations with Ningao Suen, and found he could easily recall each word the dragon said to him, with a startling degree of clarity. His mind drifted further into the past, and still, he could vividly remember each detail from conversations long ago, as though they had just happened. Sights and sounds from memories long forgotten came easily to him, and his mind remained strangely steady, even as his old life flowed before his mind's eye. His thoughts were collected, and even when reliving troubling memories and making unpleasant realizations, he was able to deal with them rationally. Though this startling development would need to be explored, Rise knew he had many more pressing issues. His first priority was water. Fortunately, it was said that all springs originated from the mountain ridge. However, He had only seen the headway of the Vanue on his ascent. He had not noticed any streams when he had been in the western wilds, but he had been preoccupied then. Hopefully there would be food and water readily available, though even then troubles would abound. He still had the storm to contend with, not to mention he would have to find some way to navigate the mountain. With the first storm of winter approaching, surviving was not as simple as finding food and water. Winter would be upon him in earnest, and he was destitute, alone, off the edge of the known world. Of all Ningal's words, Rise hoped his promise to walk any path was not in vain. Rise feared his journey into the unknown was only the beginning, if it was not cut short, which seemed likely in his eyes. His thoughts were interrupted when at last the soft light of the evening sun crept in from the west through the crevice below. Rise breathed a sigh of relief as he descended the pile of rubble. The greeting of the setting sun was a welcome sight. The fear of this peculiar land was outweighed by the relief he felt for being free of the dreadful chasm temporarily. Rise began to walk the length of the cavern's gaping mouth, searching for a safe route to descend from his dizzying vantage. He paced up and down the cliff's edge before he finally settled on a spot near the southern side of the cliff's wicked grin. There he found a slope that was not so steep, and had a route running unbroken to the base of the mountain. He knew there was not much light left, and if he did not find water with the aid of day, he would likely go wanting another night, as the cold would force him to take shelter. With the knowledge that his body was extremely weak, Rice's mind calculated the safest path and what acrobatics would be required of him. Casting one last rueful glance toward the foreboding forest, the boy dropped the blade to the stony ground below and began his descent into the western wilds. Slowly Rise rappelled down the winding slope of the mountain. The boy had scaled many walls within Hydria, a city that prided itself on its towering bulwarks. However, the treacherous mountainside offered unique difficulties in the waning autumn light. Shifting rocks and hands weakened by the lack of food and bitter cold led to frequent mishaps in spite of his caution. More than once the boy found himself teetering on the edge of oblivion. Through the perils, Rise's expertise overcame his fatigue, and he navigated his descent expertly, managing to avoid anything more serious than a scare here or there. Grateful to be on the ground, where he could walk upright, the boy rested for a moment. Taking stock of his surroundings, the boy noted the northern gale and knew he had little time. There was nothing left for him on the mountain, though he did not like to think of it. He knew he must dare the western wilds if he was to forage anything worthwhile.